Be me Troy, 31 years old, physical therapist, work at a private clinic, small team, good patients, decent pay. The clinic has been around for about 15 years, run by a husband and wife who've been doing this longer than I've been alive. Good people, don't micromanage, let me do my job. I've been there 3 years, and it's the first place I've worked where I don't dread Monday. Got my own apartment about 2 years ago. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. 1 bedroom, decent kitchen, a balcony too small to actually use, but nice to have in theory. The kitchen matters more than the square footage. I actually cook, which sounds like a small thing, but most people I know at my age are still eating out 5 nights a week or living off whatever requires minimal dishes. I started cooking properly during the relationship before last. She cooked, she taught me a few things, and then after we broke up, I kept doing it. Probably the most useful thing that came out of that situation. The gym is consistent too. 4 times a week most of the time. Nothing competitive, not training for anything. Just structure. The kind of structure that makes the rest of the day feel more manageable. I'm not religious about it. If something comes up, I skip without guilt. But most weeks it happens. Life is pretty calm. Not in a sad way. In the way that feels sustainable. I'm not chasing anything urgently right now, which means I'm also not losing anything urgently right now. The last relationship I had ended around the time I turned 29. We'd been together about 1.5 years. She was smart, worked in communications for a nonprofit, had strong opinions about everything. I respected that about her initially. The problem was the strong opinions eventually included me. What I was doing, what I wasn't doing, how I processed things, how I didn't process things enough. I'm not an emotional person in the way she wanted me to be. I feel things. I'm not a robot. But I don't narrate my feelings while I'm having them. She wanted more narration. I tried for a while, said more than I naturally would, explained more, opened up more, and at a certain point I realized I was performing a version of intimacy rather than having it, like I was doing the lines from a script of what a sensitive boyfriend says, rather than actually being closer to her. She sensed it, I think. Eventually, it became what we talked about instead of anything else. Then it became the only thing we talked about. And then we stopped. It ended without a blow-up. A long conversation on her couch on a Sunday afternoon. She cried for about 20 minutes. I sat there feeling bad about the crying and mostly blank about everything else, which she would probably say proves her point. Maybe. Maybe it does. Anyway, spent a year after that not really doing anything socially. Work and gym and weekends that blurred, which felt like recovery, even if it looked like nothing from the outside. My buddy had been on my case for most of that year about getting back on the apps. He'd met someone about 8 months into my recovery period. They moved in together pretty fast, which turned him into one of those people who need everyone around them to also be settled. I understand the impulse. You want your friends to have what you have. I just didn't feel any urgency. He brought it up probably every other time we spoke. I kept deflecting. Said I was fine, said I wasn't ready, said I wasn't interested. Then one evening, we're watching a game at his place, and at halftime he picks up my phone while I'm in the kitchen. I come back out, and he hands it back to me with Hinge open and a half-built profile. He'd grabbed 3 photos somehow. One from the gym, one from the hiking thing we did last year, one from my cousin's wedding where I actually had on a decent jacket. I kept it simple. Just put in your job and a bit about cooking. Nothing embarrassing. I protest for maybe 40 seconds. His girlfriend from across the room says, "Troy, just do it. What's the worst that happens? 2 against 1. Fine, whatever." He finishes off the profile while I sit there eating chips. I tell him if he writes anything about loving dogs or hiking, he's paying for the next round for the rest of the season. He doesn't. Keeps it clean. Hands it back. Says just use it for 2 weeks and see. I figure I'll open it a few times, tell him nothing's clicking, and we move on. I actually open it the next day at lunch, sitting in the break room at the clinic, finishing a sandwich, start going through profiles. It's the usual spread. Travel photos where someone is on a mountain or a beach looking fulfilled. Group shots where you genuinely cannot identify who you're supposed to be swiping on. Bios that seem like they were assembled from a list of safe interests. Hiking, yoga, brunch, true crime podcasts. I'm not knocking any of it. I just don't feel a strong pull. Swipe right on a few where there's something that feels genuine. Swipe left on most. Then I hit Harlow. 28. Manager at a vegan brand called Earthkind. The photos are good. There's one that looks like she's at an outdoor market somewhere. Natural light. Laughing at something off camera. A real moment. Not a posed thing. Then, a professional-ish headshot that still reads like a person and not a corporate document. One with friends at what looks like a rooftop thing. She's clearly attractive, and in the photos, she looks like someone who's at ease in the world. Then the bio. Equality isn't a request. It's a standard. 50-50 or don't bother. I read it twice. My actual first reaction isn't annoyance or eye-rolling. It's something close to appreciation. I think about the number of times I've paid for everything on a first date, done the whole thing, picked up the check without discussion. And then, 2 weeks later, she's talking about her values and independence, and I'm sitting there going, well, that seemed fine to you at the table. So, the upfront disclosure is genuinely refreshing. She said the thing. We both know what the situation is before we're sitting across from each other. I swipe right. She matches me that day. I see the notification while I'm still in the break room finishing my coffee. She messages first, which I notice and suspect is deliberate. She probably messages first on every match as a point of principle, but the message itself is real. She references something specific from my bio, asks a follow-up question about it, not a generic hey or what's up. I respond with something real. She responds quickly, and we're actually off to a decent start. The conversation over the next few days is good in a way I didn't fully expect. She's sharp, knows how to move things along, doesn't let it go flat. Tells me about the brand, the project she's running, the politics of coordinating across departments. There's a guy in supply chain who was resistant to everything for months, and she finally found the one angle that made him see it as his own idea. That part made me laugh. Asks me about work, genuinely asks, not just as a reciprocal thing, wants to know what it's actually like, what the job feels like day to day. I tell her about the shoulder guy. 62? Tried to move a washing machine alone because he didn't want to bother anyone. Came in barely able to lift his arm past his chest. She goes, that sounds like something her dad would do, and laughs. Every few exchanges, she drops something in. Something about the emotional labor that falls on women in relationships. Something about how men in her experience can't handle it when a woman doesn't need them for anything. Something about the conditioning that makes men associate being taken care of with weakness. I don't engage with it. Not because I'm intimidated or trying to dodge. I just don't want to spend my evening arguing about social dynamics with someone I've never met. I ask her something else, and she follows. I can feel her probing for a reaction that isn't coming. We talk for 5 days like this. She brings up meeting, coffee, then a bar down the street if it seems worth continuing. I say sure, Friday works. She confirms and then adds the thing about paying for herself. Says, just so we're clear, I'll obviously be paying for myself. I say, sounds good. See you Friday. She takes a beat before responding, then says, great, looking forward to it. I think she wanted me to make a thing of it, to insist or argue, or at minimum react somehow. I just confirmed the time and moved on. Friday arrives. I finish with a knee patient around 6. He's post-surgical, still doing the careful work. It takes longer than my earlier sessions. Get changed, drive across town. The coffee shop is somewhere I've been a few times. Nothing remarkable. Get there early, grab a small table by the window where the light is decent. Order a flat white, sit with my phone for a minute. She comes in maybe 4 or 5 minutes after me. And honestly, she looks better in person than in the photos. This isn't always the case. Sometimes the photos are optimized in ways the person isn't. With her, it's the opposite. She's more present in person, more alive somehow. The way she comes into the room is confident, but not performative. She spots me and walks over directly. We do the slightly awkward first greeting, that moment where nobody knows if it's a hug or a handshake, so it ends up being a half hug that doesn't commit to anything. She laughs a little at the awkwardness, which is a good sign. We sit down, she orders, we settle in. First 10 minutes are always the calibration period. You're comparing the text version to the physical one, trying to find where they line up and where they don't. With her, they line up pretty well. She's sharper in person than in text, actually. Quicker, drier. I tell her about the shoulder guy, the washing machine, the age thing. She laughs properly, not politely. Says something about men refusing to ask for help being a genuine public health crisis at this point. I say honestly, at this point in my career, I have a strong data set to support that claim. She talks about Earthkind for a while, the packaging project, the cross-department headache, the supply chain guy. She tells the story better in person, with more color. I ask about the logistics of the packaging shift, the actual mechanics of changing a supply chain mid-operation. She seems slightly surprised that I'm asking the real question rather than nodding along. Explains it with actual detail, seems to enjoy having someone who wants the real answer. We finish the coffees and walk over to the bar. It's not far. Evening is nice enough to walk. Getting dark, mild temperature, the streets are quiet. We get a table, order drinks, keep going. She's still moving the conversation well. Touches on her move to Earthkind, what she was doing before, where she sees things going. I talk a bit about the clinic, about the part of the job that actually matters to me. The patients who come in and can barely use something and leave being able to use it again. The shoulder guy going home being able to lift his arm. She says that sounds like a job that means something, and I say, yeah, it does. Somewhere in the second drink, she brings up toxic masculinity, not as an attack, more like a topic entering the room. Says something about how it affects men, too. How men are conditioned to suppress difficulty, and it surfaces sideways as withdrawal or anger, or just this inability to be present. That she sat across from a lot of guys who clearly had things going on and had no way to actually talk about it. I listen to the whole thing. Some of it seems true. I say something like, yeah, there's probably something real in that. She waits. I think she wanted me to agree strongly, or to push back, or to offer a personal story that proves or disproves the thesis. I ask her how long the Earthkind role took to really feel comfortable. She answers, we move on. It's a good evening overall. Nothing that makes me think this has to continue, but genuinely pleasant. Better than a lot of these things go. She goes to the bathroom at some point around the second drink. I wave over the server, ask for the check. She comes back, sits down. Server brings it over almost immediately. Can we split it, please? I say it the way I'd say anything else. Just a practical request. Not a statement, not a performance. Just asking for what we agreed to. She takes her card out without commenting. We pay, collect ourselves, put jackets on, walk out. Outside on the pavement. She's standing there. And I can feel her waiting for a next thing. Some signal that this continues. Maybe I'll say I'll text her. Maybe I'll ask when she's free next week. Maybe I'll at least say something about the check, soften it somehow. Nothing comes out of me that fits what she's waiting for. I had a good enough time. I don't feel a pull toward a second one. Those two things are both true, and neither cancels the other. Had a good time. Take care. I mean it, say it without anything loaded in it. Genuine small smile, not performed. Turn and walk to my car, drive home, make a sandwich, stand at the counter, eating it. Watch about 40 minutes of something I wasn't fully paying attention to. Go to bed, sleep fine. Wake up Saturday with nothing in particular on my mind. Go to the farmer's market in the morning. The coffee cart I like is there. I get my usual. Walk around for a bit. Pick up some things for the week. Vegetables. A sourdough from the bread stand. It's a nice morning. Not thinking about anything specifically. Harlow enters my head for maybe 30 seconds somewhere around the bread stand. I'm not drawn toward texting her. Not hostile toward the idea either. Just not feeling it. Get home. Put things away. Spend some time on clinic admin in the afternoon. Progress notes, a couple of scheduling things. Hit the gym in the late afternoon. Spend most of the time on the bike thinking about the knee patient's program. Wondering whether to add a movement next session or wait one more week. Get home, shower, make food, read for an hour. Sunday is even quieter. A longer walk in the afternoon. Cook a bigger meal than usual. Phone on the kitchen counter most of the day. Nothing urgent coming through. Monday is busy again. Back-to-back patients in the morning. Lunch break in the break room. I pick up my phone, and there's a text from Harlow. Hey, had fun the other night. It's friendly, nothing wrong with it. Type, yeah, it was cool. Hope your week's going well. Send. Put the phone down, finish eating. Go back to work. Afternoon sessions, busy until past 5. Packing up my bag, I check the phone. She replied maybe an hour after I sent mine. So that's it? Just cool? Look at it for a moment. She's not wrong that cool is a low-temperature response. I didn't intend it as a dismissal. I just don't manufacture warmth I don't have. Type, not sure what you mean. I had a decent time, just didn't feel a strong enough connection to push for more. Nothing bad about you, genuinely. Send. Put my jacket on, walk to the car, traffic on the way home. I see the 3 dots appear in the thread while I'm stopped at a light. They stop. Start again. Stop again. By the time I've parked outside my building and gone upstairs, she's sent something. I just think it's interesting that you had zero problem letting me pay for myself, but also zero interest in following up. I put my values out there from the start. That doesn't mean I wanted to feel like I was sitting across from someone who already checked out. Go to the kitchen, start on dinner, read it again while I'm waiting for the pan to heat up. I actually stand there for a minute, genuinely working through it. I respected what she said she wanted. I paid my half because she said she wanted to pay her half. I didn't follow up because I didn't feel a connection, which is, to me, the equivalent of what she did when she said 50-50 or don't bother. She stated a preference plainly. I stated mine plainly. Type, I wasn't trying to be cold about it. You said 50-50 up front, and I respected that. Just didn't feel a spark on my end and thought being honest about it was better than pretending otherwise. No hard feelings at all. Eat dinner, do the dishes. She reads it, doesn't respond for a while. I watch something, nothing I care about, checking my phone without urgency. Past 9, she sends a long message. I'll describe the shape of it. She says I'm emotionally unavailable, that a real connection requires someone who actually shows up for it, who demonstrates interest, pursues, makes the other person feel like they were chosen rather than assessed and found acceptable. That just because she believes in equality doesn't mean she wanted to feel like she was doing a transaction. That there is a specific type of male behavior where a man uses a woman's own principles against her, hides behind her stated preferences as justification for not trying, and that this is actually a form of defensive behavior, a kind of quiet, toxic masculinity, the type that doesn't announce itself but is still operating. That a man who was actually present and available would have recognized what she was looking for and would have engaged with it, instead of retreating into practicality. I read it twice. Put the phone face down on the coffee table. Sit in the quiet for a minute. I'm not angry. I'm also not defensive. I feel something more like a slow, specific exhaustion, the kind that comes from recognizing a dynamic you've bumped into before in some form. I was polite the entire time. I was engaged, present, asked real questions. I showed up, paid my portion as agreed, didn't ghost. Was honest when she asked. The one thing I didn't do was pursue her after she explicitly said she didn't want to be pursued. And that's apparently where the quiet toxicity lives. Go to bed. Don't respond that night. Morning comes, routine, work. During a gap between patients, I type, "No hard feelings. I think we just wanted different things." Send it. She reads it. No response. And that's the last of it. Nothing else comes. The thread just sits there after that. Read, finished. Life keeps going exactly as it was. Work, gym, weekends, cooking, the same quiet structure. Hinge stays on my phone, but I open it less. The initial mild curiosity has started to flatten. My buddy texts a few weeks after the date, asks how it went. I give him the compressed version over the phone. He goes quiet for a second, then starts laughing. Asks me to repeat the part about the bio. I confirm she wrote 50-50 or don't bother. I did 50-50. She bothered. He laughs again. Says that might be the most complete story he's heard this year. I say I genuinely don't think it's that remarkable. It's just what happened. He says no, objectively. This is a thing. We talk about something else and move on. About a month after all this, my buddy sends me a text out of nowhere one afternoon. Says his girlfriend told him something. Apparently Harlow has a podcast. His girlfriend follows it. There was an episode recently about emotionally unavailable men and toxic masculinity in modern dating. There was apparently a segment about a specific guy. A man who, and he's quoting how his girlfriend described it, used a woman's own stated beliefs against her to protect himself from real intimacy. I read that 3 times. Don't ask for the link. Not going to listen to it. But I think about the shape of the narrative for a day or two. I was on time to the date. I was present. I listened. I asked real questions. I didn't check my phone. I didn't drift. I paid my portion, exactly as she'd requested. I responded every time she texted after. When she pushed for an explanation, I gave her an honest one instead of a convenient excuse. The one thing I didn't do was chase her after she told me not to need to be chased. And that's the episode. I think about what was actually happening underneath the stated preference. And I think there were 2 different things running at the same time. There was the principle, which is the thing she built the identity around. The 50-50, the independence, the equality. She believed it genuinely. Wasn't lying when she wrote it. Probably says it to her friends. Probably thinks of it as core to who she is. And then there was the actual preference, which was operating underneath the principle. Not that I would pay for dinner, but that I would want her badly enough to push against the principle. To say, I know what you said, but let me get this. To show that the rules don't apply here because she's different, because she's worth the override. That's the actual thing she was testing for. Not the 50-50. Whether I'd fight the 50-50. And I just didn't. Not as a strategy, not as a point I was making. I took what she said at face value and responded accordingly. And the taking at face value is where the whole thing went wrong. I was supposed to see through it, supposed to understand that the stated preference is the screen and the actual preference is what's behind it. And if you can't read that, you're not emotionally intelligent. You're not meeting her where she really is. You're using her words against her. I sit with that for a while. Not with anger. More like you'd sit with any observation that clarifies something you already half knew. My buddy checks in a few days later, asks if I'm going to respond to the episode or say anything, Tell him no? Obviously not. He says, yeah, smart. We talk about something else. I make dinner that night, take a longer walk than usual after, sit on the couch and read for a while before bed. Nothing dramatically different about the evening, just a Tuesday or whatever it was. After that, the whole thing settles. No more contact with Harlow, no mutual orbit, nothing surfaces. Just two people who went on one date and went separate ways, which is the normal outcome. Except for the podcast episode, but I'm not in it by name, and she doesn't know I know. So that's fine. Work stays consistent. The shoulder patient gets discharged eventually, shakes my hand on the way out, says I gave him his arm back. More dramatic than the clinical reality, but I'll take it. That's the part of the job that actually means something. Watching someone go from barely functional to functional again. New patients come in, the schedule fills, the routine holds. I went on one other date from Hinge maybe 6 weeks after everything with Harlow. Different person, totally different vibe. She works in architecture, quiet, funny in a dry way. Also fine, also no second date. No podcast episode emerged from it, which I take as a sign that both of us just felt the same thing and handled it the same way. No drama, no narrative, just one fine evening that didn't continue. My buddy stopped forwarding profiles every week. I think he's accepted that I'm doing this at my own pace, or he just ran out of profiles he thought were suitable. Either way, I appreciate the reduced pressure. Hinge is still on my phone. I open it occasionally, swipe a few times, see what comes up. No urgency around it. Life is pretty good. Not exciting, not a story, not a podcast episode about anything, just a regular life that works. I know what I'm doing tomorrow and the day after. I'm not chasing anything that's avoiding me. I'm not performing to stay in something that isn't working. That's not nothing. That's actually the whole thing. If I learned anything from the whole Harlow situation, it's probably just a confirmation of what I already suspected, that sometimes the stated preference and the real preference are running completely separately, and the person holding them doesn't necessarily know that. That's not unique to her. It's probably true of most people in some area of their life, including me, probably, in ways I can't see clearly. But the specific version I ran into, where the stated preference is an identity and the real preference is the opposite, where taking someone at their word is the offense, where believing what someone says is the evidence against you. That's a specific kind of difficult to navigate, because there is no way to win. If I'd paid for everything, she would have had a problem with that too. If I'd pushed for a second date after one mediocre evening, that also would have been something. The only way through it is to want her so, obviously and specifically, that she feels chosen despite her principle. And I just didn't want her that way, which is fine, which is allowed, which is ultimately exactly the same thing she was allowed to feel about me. Anyway, still a physical therapist, still in the apartment, still going to the farmer's market when I can, still cooking my own food, still single, still fine with it. My buddy keeps living his settled life and occasionally checking in on me. I'm not running from anything, just going at a pace that feels right. MFW, she wrote 50-50, or don't bother in the bio. MFW, I did exactly 50-50. MFW, that became a podcast episode about quiet, toxic masculinity. MFW. I drove home and made a sandwich and slept fine. Actually, let me go back and fill in a few things I glossed over. The app experience itself was stranger than I made it sound. I'd been off any dating platform for about 2.5 years before my buddy set this up. The last time I'd used one was when apps were less of a whole lifestyle and more of a thing you tried and forgot about. Coming back to it now felt different, more saturated, more performative somehow. Every profile felt like it was optimized for something, not necessarily for meeting a person, but for presenting a version of a person that looks good on the platform. Which makes sense. I get why people do it. But it creates this weird distance between the profile and the actual human. You swipe right on an image and a list of interests. You talk to a writing style, and then eventually you meet whoever is actually behind all of that. And sometimes there's barely any gap, which is good. And sometimes the gap is significant, and you're sitting across from a stranger. Harlow's gap was small, which I already said, but the conversation leading up to the date had its own texture I didn't fully describe. The thing about the ideology drops. She'd be in the middle of a perfectly normal conversation about her job or a restaurant or whatever, and then something would come in. It was never a full argument, just a statement, like a flag being planted, testing whether I'd salute it or question it. And when I did neither, she'd wait a beat and then let it pass. I'm not saying she was doing it deliberately. I think she genuinely thinks about those things a lot, and they just surface in conversation. But the frequency of it created a mild background hum. Like every third message was a small ideological checkpoint. I passed them by not engaging, which I suspect wasn't the pass she was looking for. The actual pass she wanted was probably different. Maybe for me to engage thoughtfully, to demonstrate that I'd thought about these things, to show I was the kind of man who could have that conversation without defensiveness. Instead, I just redirected every time, which probably read as avoidance, and which maybe was avoidance in some technical sense. I just didn't want to debate social theory before we'd eaten a meal together. There's also a thing about the days between matching and the date that I left out. On about the third day of talking, she went quiet for most of a day. Not ghosting. She came back that evening, but noticeably quieter. I didn't push, didn't check in about it. When she came back, she said she'd had a long day at work. Supply chain thing, some internal disagreement that blew up into a meeting that ate her afternoon. She vented for a few minutes about it. I asked a couple of questions. She said something like, "It's nice that you actually ask follow-up questions instead of just waiting for me to finish," which told me something about her previous experiences. I stored it and moved on. But it's interesting in retrospect, because on the date itself, the thing I got dinged for later was not pursuing enough. And yet, in that moment, the thing that read well was just paying attention, which is what I was doing the whole time. Paying attention, being present, not manufacturing things that weren't there. Seems like those two things got interpreted differently depending on the context. Paying attention, and she was frustrated about work. Emotionally available. Paying attention to whether I actually felt something after the date. Unavailable. I don't know what to do with that distinction exactly. It's just a thing I noticed. The date itself had one moment I also skipped over. Partway through the bar portion, she asked me directly something about my previous relationship. I don't remember the exact wording, but something like whether I'd been in anything serious recently. I gave her the compressed version. 1.5 years. Ended about 2 years ago. No drama. She asked why it ended. I said something honest, but not detailed. That we wanted different things emotionally, and it wasn't working. She pushed a little, not aggressively, just curious. Asked what I meant by emotionally. I said something like I'm fairly steady. She wanted more open processing out loud. We weren't compatible on that front. Harlow nodded and said something like, "That's at least self-aware," which is a funny thing to say, like she was grading me on the answer. At least self-aware. Not, "That sounds hard," or "I get that," or "Yeah, compatibility matters." Just at least self-aware. I noticed it and didn't comment on it. Later I thought about that phrasing. At least self-aware is like saying, "At least you showed up." It's a compliment structured around a low bar, the implication being that the bar was in question, which combined with everything else paints a pretty clear picture of what she was walking into. The date expecting. A man who didn't know himself, who'd be defensive about it, who couldn't talk about his past. And when I was none of those things, it briefly seemed like a good sign. But somewhere the expectations she came in with didn't fully recalibrate. She'd set up a certain kind of evening in her head, a man who needed to prove himself, who she'd help through it with her principles intact. And I just didn't need to prove myself in that particular way. I wasn't struggling with the things she was ready to help with, which is its own kind of incompatibility, I suppose. There's also the thing about walking to the bar that I didn't fully describe. The 5 minutes between the coffee shop and the bar were actually the most natural part of the evening, out of the pressure of the table setting, moving, the city around us. She was talking about the market photo in her profile, said she took it in Portugal, went alone, spent 10 days there. I asked what made her go alone rather than with someone. She said she'd been waiting for the right person to go with for 2 years, and eventually decided the waiting was its own kind of loss. So she just booked it. I said that sounds like the right call. She looked at me kind of sideways and said most guys she tells that story to say it sounds lonely. I said I don't know. Going alone to a place you've been waiting to go seems like the opposite of lonely. She didn't say anything for a moment, then said yeah, it kind of was. That was the most honest minute of the evening. No principles being stated, no checkpoints, no waiting to see how I'd react. Just two people talking about a decision she made that mattered to her. I remember thinking if the whole evening had been more like that walk, it might have gone differently. But the walk ended, and we sat back down, and the evening continued the way it did. And here we are. I don't tell that part of the story to say it was almost something. I tell it because it's accurate. There was a version of her in that 5 minutes that was easier to be around than the version at the table, and I don't know if she knows that. She probably writes the whole evening the same way regardless of that 5 minutes. The guy who checked out, who didn't try, who used her values as a shield. Not the guy who asked about Portugal and meant it. Anyway, I've been on a couple more dates since all of this. Different people, different outcomes. One was actually pretty good. We went out twice. It fizzled out naturally after that. No bad feelings. She was the first person I'd met in a while who I could sit across from and feel genuinely comfortable. Not performing, not trying to be the answer to her expectations, just existing in the same room and having it be fine. Those 2 evenings were worth something, even if nothing continued. I think that's all I'm looking for, really. Not the perfect match or the story that ends in a wedding, just someone you can sit across from without doing the performance, where you're both just people, no audition. And it turns out that's harder to find than it sounds, not because people are bad, but because everyone comes in with a version of what they need, and sometimes those versions are running on different logic entirely. And you only find that out by actually sitting across from them, which requires doing it over and over, which gets tiring in the way any repetitive thing gets tiring. But I haven't given up on it, haven't written off the whole thing, just doing it at a pace that doesn't grind me down, opening the app when I feel like it, not when I feel like I should. Anyway, that's the whole story, or at least the parts I remember clearly. The rest is just regular life, which is mostly what life is.